The sea was calm that morning, deceptively calm. The Pacific stretched endlessly, a mirror of blue steel beneath the rising sun. From the deck of the USS Yorktown, sailors wiped salt and oil from their faces, their eyes still stinging from smoke that had not yet cleared. The Battle of Coral Sea had barely ended, and the Yorktown, battered, burned, and broken, was expected to limp home for months of repair. Japanese scouts believed she was finished. Tokyo's naval staff marked her as sunk, her name struck from their intelligence boards. But beneath that smoke, something else was happening. On the other side of the ocean, in the great dry docks of Pearl Harbor, hammers would soon ring like war drums. Sparks would fly into the night as American sailors, engineers, and shipwrights prepared to perform what the Japanese Imperial Navy thought impossible. They would bring a crippled aircraft carrier back to life, in days, not months. By May of 1942, the Pacific War had become a race of attrition. Japan dominated the seas, its carrier fleet undefeated, its admirals confident. Admiral Yamamoto's plan was working. Destroy the U.S. Navy's carriers before they could rebuild. America's response had been fierce but costly. Coral Sea was technically a draw, but the cost for the U.S. was heavy. The Lexington was lost, and the Yorktown was bleeding from dozens of wounds. Her flight deck torn, boilers crippled, bulkheads warped by explosions. Under any normal standard, she was done for the season. Japanese planners believed no carrier could be repaired that fast. In Tokyo's war rooms, the Imperial Navy's confidence grew. They expected months before the next American carrier could enter combat. That assumption, so small, so seemingly logical, would become one of the greatest miscalculations of the Pacific War. As the Yorktown limped back to Pearl Harbor, her damage control teams refused to stop. Men crawled into scalding compartments, patching leaks with makeshift plates, draining oil with buckets, sealing ruptured fuel lines with cloth and prayer. The carrier's crew refused to die. When she entered Pearl on May 27th, the harbor workers watched in disbelief. Her flight deck sagged. Planes still sat burned and twisted on her stern. And yet, her captain stood on the bridge, demanding a miracle. Admiral Chester Nimitz, calm and analytical, inspected the damage himself. The Midway operation loomed just 10 days away. Intelligence had confirmed Japan's next target, and the Americans had only 2 operational carriers left. The Yorktown, no matter her condition, was needed now. Engineers told Nimitz that full repairs would take 3 months. Nimitz didn't blink. He gave them 3 days, and so began one of the most extraordinary acts of industrial and human determination in modern warfare. Pearl Harbor's repair yards came alive like a heartbeat. Welders, machinists, and electricians worked in shifts that never stopped. Floodlights turned the night into day. Steel plates arrived by truck, and cranes swung across the docks with mechanical precision. Over 2,400 men worked non-stop to patch the hull, rebuild engines, and replace 25,000 square feet of flight deck. There was no time for paperwork, no time for rest. Coffee replaced sleep. Courage replaced fatigue. The sound never ceased. The air was filled with the crackle of welding arcs and the deep hum of compressors. Men worked ankle-deep in oil and salt water, cutting and riveting, sometimes guessing at dimensions when blueprints ran out. One sailor later said, "We weren't fixing a ship, we were racing against fate." Inside the hull, engineers from the Bureau of Ships coordinated with yard foremen like conductors of a desperate symphony. Every hour counted. Every minute meant a step closer to meeting Nimitz's impossible order. They stripped damaged engines, rewired control systems, and repaired elevators vital for launching aircraft. Fuel tanks were resealed, boilers brought online, and smoke from welding filled the night sky like fog. In Tokyo, meanwhile, Yamamoto's staff prepared the Midway operation with confidence. Their reports listed Yorktown as destroyed. Japan would bring 4 first-line carriers to crush the Americans, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, against what they believed were only 2 U.S. ships, Enterprise and Hornet. That assumption shaped everything: tactics, timing, formation. They had no idea that across the Pacific, the Americans were rewriting the limits of naval engineering. When dawn broke on June 2nd, the Yorktown's deck gleamed with fresh paint and hurried repairs. Her boilers fired for the first time since Coral Sea. Her elevators rose smoothly. Her radar hummed with life. The men who had worked through those nights stepped back, their faces blackened, their hands raw, their eyes bloodshot. Against every expectation, The Yorktown was ready for sea again. 3 days later she sailed. Her scars were still visible, plating mismatched, weld seams unpainted, but she was operational. Nimitz sent her east toward Midway, joining Enterprise and Hornet in a gamble that would decide the Pacific's fate. No ship in naval history had ever been repaired and redeployed so fast. Japanese codebreakers never intercepted the truth. Their intelligence officers continued to report only 2 American carriers. Their strategy for Midway was based on incomplete information, a fatal blind spot born from overconfidence. Yamamoto's staff believed the Americans would defend weakly, then retreat. They believed victory was inevitable. As the Yorktown cut through the Pacific waves, her engines humming with fresh power, few aboard could have imagined how crucial their ship would soon become. In less than a week, she would face the Imperial Navy again, this time head-on. But for now the crew only knew one thing. They had cheated time itself. Below decks, engineers tightened bolts that still glowed from heat. Deck crews loaded torpedoes and ammunition. Pilots reviewed maps under red lights, their faces drawn, their minds restless. There was no ceremony, no celebration. Just silence and the distant hum of the ocean. On June 4, 1942, as the sun rose over the Midway atoll, the Yorktown took her place alongside the Enterprise and Hornet. Smoke from distant engines drifted across the horizon. The Japanese fleet was coming, and they still believed. Yorktown was gone. The stage was set for a confrontation. That would shock the world, the miracle of Pearl. Harbor's repair yards had given the United States one extra ship, one extra chance, and soon that single ship would tip the balance of an empire. To the Japanese admirals, the Yorktown should have been a ghost. But ghosts have a way of returning to haunt the living. At dawn on June 4, 1942, the Pacific was painted gold. High above the water, Japanese reconnaissance planes swept the horizon, their engines humming steadily. The Imperial Japanese Navy's carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, moved in perfect formation. Admiral Nagumo's flagship cut through the waves with the confidence of a predator certain of its prey. Reports had confirmed it. Only 2 American carriers were in the area. Victory seemed predetermined, but somewhere beyond the line of sight, a third silhouette glided across the sea. The USS Yorktown, patched, scorched, and scarred, was steaming at full speed toward destiny. Every weld, every plate, every wire repaired in those frantic 72 hours now faced the ultimate test. The men who had rebuilt her were not in laboratories or clean factories. They were sailors and engineers who had worked through exhaustion, fueled only by coffee, adrenaline, and sheer will. The secret to Yorktown's rebirth was not luck. It was system. America's shipyards had been redesigned after Pearl Harbor to operate like combat units themselves, modular, fast, and adaptable. The Bureau of Ships had standardized carrier components down to individual valves and pipe assemblies. This meant that when Yorktown limped in, her replacements were already waiting in storage racks. Electricians from the Naval Engineering Department replaced entire switchboards in hours. Welding crews used new portable oxyacetylene rigs that cut repair times by half. Even her radar, damaged at Coral Sea, was replaced overnight with an upgraded CXAM-1 set, giving her a vital advantage in detection range. It was, in every sense, a masterpiece of logistics and engineering improvisation. While Japanese naval tradition prized craftsmanship and precision, the Americans had learned to prize speed and efficiency. They didn't rebuild Yorktown to perfection. They rebuilt her to fight. And that single difference in philosophy would decide the fate of fleets. By mid-morning, Yorktown's radar picked up faint echoes, Japanese bombers closing fast. Alarms shrieked through the ship. Crewmen sprinted to stations, sealing bulkheads and manning guns. Captain Elliot Buckmaster's voice rang over the loudspeakers. "All hands prepare for air attack." The battle for Midway had begun. From the bridge, the horizon erupted into movement. Dots in the sky grew into aircraft, Nakajima B-5Ns and Aichi D-3As, dive bombers and torpedo planes, screaming toward the task force. The first wave hit the Enterprise and Hornet's escorts, while another locked onto Yorktown. The ship's guns roared, filling the air with black bursts of flak. Sailors fed ammunition belts with blistered hands as shells rattled across the deck. Yorktown maneuvered hard, her engines straining. The repairs to her boilers held. Her speed was nearly full 32 knots. When the first bombs fell, she turned sharply to port, dodging 2 direct hits by seconds. But not all could be avoided. A 250-kilogram bomb struck near the island structure, tearing through the flight deck and exploding deep inside. The ship shuddered violently. Smoke poured upward, and men were thrown to the deck. For a moment, the crew feared the worst. Yet again, the Yorktown refused to die. Damage control parties, trained to near perfection after Coral Sea, moved instantly. They sealed off burning compartments, rerouted power, and began flooding control to counterbalance the list. Within minutes, fires were contained, and aircraft were being prepared for counterattack. In that chaos, the ship's repair teams performed acts bordering on the impossible, restoring electrical systems with jury-rigged cables, cooling overheating machinery with seawater pumps, and patching ruptures with steel scrap. While Yorktown fought to stay alive, American dive bombers, guided by intelligence and luck, found the Japanese carriers. Within minutes, 3 of Japan's 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were engulfed in flames. Their decks became infernos as fuel and ammunition detonated. The Japanese fleet, which had believed itself unassailable, was suddenly crippled. Nagumo's formation disintegrated, but the battle was not over. The surviving Japanese carrier, Hiryu, launched a counterstrike, desperate to avenge her fallen sisters. Her pilots were elite, hardened by years of war. They found Yorktown by noon. Through the thick clouds and burning sky, they descended like hawks. The ship's anti-aircraft guns thundered again, tracer fire streaking upward, cutting through smoke. Several attackers were hit, spiraling into the sea, but 2 torpedoes found their mark. The first struck amidships on the port side. The second hit moments later. The blast ripped through compartments, flooding engine rooms and knocking out boilers. The ship heaved, tilted, and came to a halt. Power failed. Lights flickered out. The mighty Yorktown was dead in the water. Silence followed, broken only by the hiss of escaping steam and the cries of wounded men. The crew fought to save her, pumping out water, sealing breaches, reigniting systems. But even as they worked, the Hiryu's fate was sealed. American dive bombers located her, and within hours turned her into a burning wreck. The balance of power in the Pacific had shifted in a single day. Yet amid the triumph, Yorktown's crew still battled the sea. Pumps roared, bulkheads groaned, and the ship's list grew. Captain Buckmaster gave the order to abandon ship, knowing that saving lives mattered more than saving steel. Men climbed down ropes into waiting destroyers, glancing back at the carrier that had defied logic, expectation, and time. She would not sink easily. For hours, Yorktown remained afloat, as if refusing to leave the fight. Even as night fell, she drifted stubbornly across the ocean, her flag still visible against the dark horizon. Days later, when a Japanese submarine torpedoed her again, it took only then for her to finally surrender to the sea. The technical achievement that had resurrected Yorktown became legend in naval circles. Engineers marveled at how quickly her systems had been brought back online, how damage control procedures developed after Coral Sea had been perfected in practice. Her survival during the first bombing run was proof that rapid repair and adaptive design could save lives in combat. In contrast, Japanese carriers, though built with exquisite precision, lacked such modular repair capacity. Their damage control systems were fragmented, their crews less trained in emergency containment. What the Americans discovered through fire was a lesson in wartime evolution. Flexibility beats perfection, and readiness beats elegance. The men who had worked those sleepless nights at Pearl Harbor never saw the battle, but their fingerprints were on every rivet, every plate that held Yorktown together long enough to alter history. Their work had given Admiral Nimitz the edge he needed, and given America something even greater, a symbol of resilience. The Battle for Midway would be remembered for its daring pilots and decisive strikes, but beneath it all lay a deeper truth. Wars are not only won by those who fight on the front lines, but also by those who can rebuild what's broken, faster than the enemy can imagine. As Yorktown slipped beneath the waves, she carried with her the proof that American engineering was now a weapon as powerful as any bomb or torpedo. And in Tokyo, when news reached the Imperial Navy that Yorktown had been present at Midway, shock turned to disbelief. How had a sunk carrier returned from the dead? How had the Americans done it? The answer, as Japan would soon learn, was not just in steel but in spirit. The miracle of Yorktown was more than a repair job. It was the birth of a doctrine, one that would redefine warfare itself. When the smoke cleared over the Pacific, the truth was undeniable. Japan's dream of naval supremacy had been broken. The Battle of Midway was more than a victory, it was a revelation. For the first time, the Imperial Navy's commanders realized that they were fighting an enemy who could not only build ships faster, but also repair them at speeds that defied logic. In Tokyo, senior naval strategists gathered in dimly lit war rooms, staring at maps covered with red pins. They struggled to comprehend how Yorktown, reported sunk at Coral Sea, had reappeared within weeks. It challenged their entire understanding of warfare. The Japanese Navy's strength had always been built on discipline, perfection, and precision. But the Americans were rewriting the rules. Their power came from industrial flexibility, an invisible weapon far more dangerous than battleships or carrier squadrons. Japanese intelligence officers searched for answers. How could a nation repair a 25,000-ton warship in mere days? How had American dockyards produced spare parts and systems so quickly? The answer lay across the ocean, in the sprawling shipyards of Pearl Harbor, Mare Island, and Bremerton. There, thousands of men and women worked around the clock. Electricians, machinists, welders, and naval engineers had transformed chaos into coordination. Their names were seldom known, yet their hands shaped the war's outcome as surely as any admiral's orders. Every shipyard became a battlefield of its own, filled with sparks, heat, and roaring machinery. Engineers designed modular repair techniques that allowed entire sections of a ship to be swapped like puzzle pieces. New cranes, welding torches, and portable generators turned what once took weeks into hours. The Navy's Bureau of Ships issued updated repair protocols, teaching sailors to handle emergencies without waiting for dockside assistance. This was not just innovation, it was survival by design. The Japanese, meanwhile, were shackled by tradition. Their shipyards demanded perfection before a vessel left port. Their repair crews focused on quality over time. But in a war that turned by the hour, perfection was a luxury. America had mastered the art of the temporary fix, the ability to make a ship good enough to fight again by sunrise. The difference in philosophy was as decisive as any weapon system. The psychological effect rippled across both sides. American sailors, once haunted by the memory of Pearl Harbor, now believed they could recover from anything. The Yorktown's rebirth became legend in every mess hall and training manual. Young sailors were told her story as proof that no ship, no man, and no nation was beyond repair. The Navy coined a phrase that would echo through every Pacific port: keep her afloat no matter what. For Japan, the effect was the opposite. Reports from surviving carrier crews revealed disbelief bordering on dread. They described American ships returning to combat weeks after being declared sunk. Rumors spread among pilots that the enemy's carriers could heal themselves, that the Americans had ghost ships rising from the deep. The legend of Yorktown blurred the line between fact and myth, and it demoralized those who faced her successors. Strategically, the impact was monumental. By late 1942, the U.S. Navy's repair and refit cycles had become an industrial symphony. While Japan struggled to replace carriers lost at Midway, America was already launching the Essex class, the next generation of floating air bases. Each one carried lessons learned from Yorktown: reinforced flight decks, improved fire suppression systems, modular power conduits, and better compartmentalization for damage control. In the Solomon Islands, in the Gilberts, in the Marianas, every major campaign that followed bore the fingerprints of those design philosophies. Ships struck by bombs or torpedoes were patched within days, sometimes hours, and returned to action. Carriers like Enterprise and Saratoga suffered repeated hits yet continued to operate. The Japanese, meanwhile, found their damaged ships stranded for months or written off entirely. The tide of war was turning not only because of pilots and admirals, but because of blueprints, welding torches, and the will to improvise. The morale of the American fleet soared. In letters home, sailors wrote about the miracle workers in the shipyards, describing how a broken destroyer or carrier would leave port looking new again. For every man at sea, there was another behind him, bending steel, forging parts, and ensuring that the next battle could be fought. Even Japanese post-war analysts admitted that they had underestimated this dimension of warfare. In interrogations after 1945, surviving officers from the combined fleet confessed that they had not considered the repair speed of the enemy as a factor in strategy. That single oversight, they realized too late, had cost them the Pacific, but the story did not end in 1942. The doctrine born from Yorktown's resurrection evolved into a new form of warfare, what modern strategists would later call maintenance superiority. By the time of the Korean War, the U.S. Navy had mobile repair bases stationed at sea, floating workshops capable of restoring ships and aircraft mid-campaign. During Vietnam, this concept matured further, allowing carriers to remain operational for months without dry dock. In the Gulf War and beyond, that philosophy was digitalized and globalized. Engineers and technicians could analyze damage, coordinate repairs, and deliver solutions within hours, sometimes remotely. What began as frantic welding in Pearl Harbor's docks had become a science of logistics that defined American military power for generations. The emotional legacy, however, was deeper. Yorktown's crew, those who survived Midway, carried her memory as a symbol of what America had learned, that strength is not in never breaking, but in always rebuilding. At reunions decades later, gray-haired veterans would touch the hull of the second Yorktown, CV-10, commissioned in 1943, and whisper that she carried the soul of the first. Visitors to the preserved Yorktown today in Charleston, South Carolina, still walk her decks unaware that her name represents not one ship, but an idea born from chaos, tempered by fire and proven in the Pacific. The Japanese miscalculation at Midway was not just tactical, it was philosophical. They saw warfare as a contest of perfect machines and perfect plans. The Americans learned that war was a storm, and survival belonged to those who could repair their sails before the next wave hit. In the end, the Yorktown was more than steel. She was resilience given form. Her rebirth inspired an entire generation of sailors and engineers to believe that no defeat was final, and her sinking reminded them that even miracles have limits, but those limits can be pushed further than anyone believes possible. As the Pacific War dragged on, new carriers replaced the old, new crews took up the fight, but the spirit of Yorktown endured, in every repair gang, in every shipyard, in every spark that leapt from a welder's torch. When historians later asked Admiral Nimitz what had truly turned the tide at Midway, he paused for a long moment before answering. "It wasn't luck," he said. "It was the men who refused to let a ship die." That single sentence captured the essence of a nation's triumph, because in the Pacific, Japan's greatest miscalculation wasn't underestimating America's firepower. It was underestimating how fast Americans could rebuild it.